Hi folks, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always, a huge thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, the Bushcraft Padawan. It's November. I've got my bushcraft gear with me. I'm here all day. It's November's Bushcraft All Dayer. Regular viewers and subscribers will know that when I come out and do these Bushcraft All Dayers, I always like to come out with a to-do list in mind, a list of things that I like to try for the first time or revisit or practice. And November is no exception. So what have I got lined up for today then? Well, I want to try my hand at digging a gypsy well, and I'll explain more about that later on in the video. The colder months are coming in here in the UK. Still not too bad, to be perfectly honest. It's still relatively mild considering we're almost at the end of November, but you can see that I've got my my slightly bigger jacket on today. So with the colder months in mind, I want to experiment and tinker around with a slightly different tarp configuration than what I normally do. And I'd also like to cook a fry up in the woods as well using my skillet. So I want to experiment with a slightly different fire lay today, something that is going to give me some hot embers to fry upon rather than a raging flame and raging fire. So gypsy well, tarp configuration and a fry up. I'd also like, if the opportunity presents itself, to harvest some silver birch, because I haven't done any carving for a little while, so I want to see if I can harvest some of that and take that away with me as well. Let's see how the day unfolds. Let's talk first then about this gypsy well. Recently on my YouTube page I put a poll up asking people what their experiences were of digging gypsy wells, who dug one, who'd heard of one but hadn't dug one, who didn't have a clue what I was talking about. And at that point when I did the poll, probably 75–80% of people had either never dug one but was aware of it, or were aware of it, or hadn't got a clue what I was talking about. So it seems that there's an audience for talking a little bit more about what a gypsy well is. Gypsy well, they're often known as Indian wells, or can be referred to as Indian wells. However, I know them as gypsy wells, and that's what I'm going to refer to them as. What is it? It's a hole that is dug in the ground that collects water. I've just described a puddle, right? A puddle is a hole in the ground that collects water. There's a little bit more to it than that. It's purposefully dug in the ground with the purpose of both collecting water and, to a degree, filtering that water whilst it is being collected as well. From the reading that I've done about this, I've read that it's advisable for them to be about 50 centimetres by 50 centimetres by 50 centimetres. So 50 centimetres left to right, front to back, top to bottom. So it's a respectable sized hole in the ground. I've brought a trowel along with me today to help dig this. I thought it was perhaps taking the mick a bit by bringing a shovel out. However, I really couldn't be bothered using a digging stick, because I imagine that's going to take all day just to dig the hole. So I've brought this along to give me a 21st century helping hand. It's more the concept of the gypsy well that I'm interested in today, rather than being able to know how hard it is to dig a hole in the ground. I'm well aware of that. So I'll be using a trowel to help me do that. What does it do and how does it work then? Well, you should dig them in relatively close proximity to either a visible surface water source, so a river, a pond, a stream, something like that, or where you suspect there is a low or a high water table, so boggy ground, marshy ground, swampy ground, potentially dried up streams and riverbeds and things like that, where you have a gut feeling that there is water in the ground, if not on the surface. You dig it in relatively close proximity to that, because what you want to do is you want to let nature take its course. You want to allow that hole to fill up with water, either from the bottom up or from the side in, or probably both of them, and allow it to fill with water. Now, whilst it's filling with water, you're collecting water. So, you know, a tick in the box for water collection. But to a degree, and I stress the to a degree, you're also filtering the water through the actual ground itself. Yes, it's still going to be dirty and contaminated. I'm not challenging that, but the premise is that the ground will act as a type of filter by itself. You can then collect that partially filtered water. Here's our old friend, the brown bag, and then you can run it through something much more robust like this. Then you can boil it. The reason I'm doing this is because in the past, regular viewers will know that in the area that I'm in, there is a good water source, but it's incredibly dirty. It's standing water, and just scooping some water out carefully, even though there's no visible debris, twigs, leaves, branches, mud, just the water itself it is teeming with suspended particles in the water. So a friend of mine, Alex Shed, has suggested that I dig a gypsy well relatively close to that water source. That's what I'm going to do. I want to see if the water that it pulls in, that is drawn into it, is cleaner than if I just scoop it from the standing water itself. So that's the plan. It's going to take me a while to dig it. It's going to take a while for it to fill. I'm led to believe that once it's filled, you should empty it 2 or 3 times and then collect that second or third fill of water from that point on. It's going to take a while. It may even take all day. So I'm going to start doing it now, then I'm going to get on with my other tasks. Because as we know, if water filtering and collection is part of your daily routine, these things take a while. Best to get them started so that you can do other things concurrently while it's doing its job. So behind me is some standing water. Let's move the camera and myself over there. Let's start digging a hole. So this is what I've dug so far. We can see the proximity to the actual stream itself there. Definitely isn't 50 by 50 wide. It's probably getting on for about 50 centimetres deep, to be perfectly honest. The problem I'm having, which I'm not sure is a good problem or a bad problem, is it is filling up so quickly that it kind of makes it difficult to actually get to the bottom, particularly with a trowel, to actually empty it, to actually be able to get to the bottom and dig it out. Not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. Does that mean that it's too close to the water source? Does it mean that this is a good position and it's going to fill up quickly? I'm not sure. Now, as you can see from the colour of that, that hasn't been filtered. What the advice is to let it fill up, then carefully scoop it out. Repeat that process 2 or 3 times. That'll also allow the sediment that I've naturally disturbed whilst I've been digging this to also settle to the bottom as well. But very, very impressed with how quickly it fills up. Just not entirely sure that I should be impressed by it. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. I'm going to let this fill up a little more now. I'm going to go away, I'm going to get on with some other tasks today. I'm going to come back, bring the camera with me and scoop it out and show you just how quickly it fills up again. And let's see, you know, this is an experiment, this is a trial, this is me learning things along the way. My gut tells me this is perhaps too close to the actual water source, but I really don't know. Let's find out later on. The gypsy well is doing its thing over there, at least I hope it is. So I've come back to the main camp area where I want to have a little play around and experiment with a different tarp configuration. Most of the time, actually all the time, when I set up a tarp, I set up a traditional A-type shelter with my fingers touching there being the central point, the ridgeline point, if you like, of the tarp, and my elbows being where the tarp ends. And that's that sort of traditional A-type, A-frame type shelter. And I like that. I like that type of shelter. I can get it really high. I can potentially walk underneath it. It's huge. It gives me loads of ground space to shelter from. When I look out in the morning or an evening, I can see everything around me. I feel much more closely connected with my surroundings. I love that setup. It also allows me to run the ridgeline. What's the word I'm looking for? Run the ridgeline permanently. That's the word, permanently through the ridgeline loops. So it's a very, very, very quick deployment. I can have something to sit under or stand under within 3 or 4 minutes at the most, 5 maximum. Very, very quick setup. The challenge with it is that when it comes to the winter months and the colder wind months, nothing to do with rain or snow really, but the colder winds sweeping in, because I like to have the tarp high up, the wind sweeps in underneath and it can become bitterly cold under there. If I sink the shelter down so that the elbows, the edges of the tarp are touching the floor, it becomes very cocooned, and because I'm a tall guy, I'm hunched up underneath there. It's like being back in the army again. So I've been looking around for tarp configurations that will still give me some height, but if I position them correctly, I can actually get some decent protection from the wind. And the type that I'm going to experiment with today is generally known as the Adirondack type shelter. I've seen it referred to by a few other names, but the Adirondack shelter is the shape and the configuration that I'm going to play around with today. Just behind me are two trees. They're going to be my tie-out points for to elevate the tarp off the ground. So join me if you will. I've never done this before. I've read a few PDFs that explain how to do it. I've watched a few videos. I've never ever tried this before. So what you're seeing on camera now is very much me sinking or swimming with this type of shelter setup. Let's see how it goes. Here's the tarp that I'm using at the moment, but not for much longer. In fact, I'm due to have delivered today an Alp Kit Rig 7. This is a DD tarps 3x3. I don't particularly like it. It's fairly poor quality. It's failed after only about 15 months of use. The guy line, if you notice there, can you see that fraying? There you go, you see it from that angle there. That's the guy line, or the ridge line should I say, loops actually fraying on me. And this doesn't get continual use, I have to say, so pretty poor quality, not great after sales support. So I'm moving it on, and I bought myself an Alp Kit Rig 7 Alp Kit Rig 7 2 or 3 year guarantee on it. I do have my cordage, my ridgeline cordage, permanently running through these loops like I just mentioned. I'm going to need to take those out for this type of setup. So for me, that's a disadvantage. Now my cordage and my tarp are now potentially physically separate from one another. So for me that's a downside, but let's play it by ear. Let's see how we get on with this type of tarp setup. I've got my ridgeline set up here. You can see running left to right, right to left. And then if I move the camera down, you notice that I've laid the tarp out, but instead of laying one of the flat edge or the edges of the tarp parallel to that ridgeline, what I've actually done is I've taken a corner of the tarp and pointed it at the ridgeline. So in relation to the ridgeline, we're looking at this from and it appears to be a diamond shape as opposed to a square shape if we were to turn it through an angle slightly. So in relation to the guy line, the ridge line, then the tarp needs to be laid out in a diamond type relationship to that ridge line. I'm going to take that corner of the diamond, the corner of the tarp if you like, I'm going to throw it over the ridge line, and then trying to keep both the left and right hand side of this diamond equal, I'm just going to keep feeding it over until I reach the second tie-out point on this tarp, on the right and left hand side. So that's the second one on the right hand side, and that's the second one on the left hand side. Depends on, of course, how you're looking at it in relation to me. But you get the idea. There. And there. We've now got that part of the diamond projecting out from the ridgeline. I'm going to tie that off temporarily down onto the ground, just so that it doesn't roll back over again, just to keep it in place. Here's that tie-out point on the tarp that I have laid over the ridgeline. Here's a prusik loop that I've placed onto there, and I'm just going to run the prusik loop towards that tie-out point, pop it through, stick a twig in there, and just tension. I've done exactly the same at the other side off camera, and that's why when I pull this, you can see that this is getting nice and taut and the tarp isn't being pulled with me because it's secured at that end through a prusik loop as well. I've brought you now round to the back of the shelter and I'm showing you here there's the ridgeline just so you can get your bearings, and as we know there is a triangle of material hanging over the other side of that ridgeline. Let's work back then. Here's the other end of that diamond shape on the ground there. You'll notice that it's not pegged out at all. If we move one tie out loop beyond that, you can see I've pegged it out, and on the right hand side one tie out loop and I've pegged it out. Now interestingly, lots of the videos that I've watched suggest going 1-2 tie out points on either side and pegging out there, but for me all of this material here at the bottom of the triangle is just wasted because it ends up getting tucked back inside the shelter, and for me that's a lot of material, a lot of internal space that's being wasted. So I've opted for going 1 tie out point either side and pegging. Then I miss a tie out point, then I peg again. Looking at this side, I miss a tie out point and then I peg again, and hopefully you can just make out that peg just above my finger there and just above my finger there. Very difficult to see when there's a lot of leaf litter on the ground. So let's just have a little wander around and I can show you that in real time. There's the diamond, there's a tie out point, there's another tie out point, and then right on the edge of the shelter I've tied it out again, and that is duplicated on the other side of the shelter as well. And here we have the view from the front of the shelter. There's that triangle of material that I spoke about. You can just about make out here the prusik loop, and that's replicated on the other side. And here we can see the internal space that I've got. There isn't as much internal space in my opinion as there is with that classic A-frame type shelter. However, 3 of the 4 sides of this shelter are completely enclosed. They're pegged right down to the ground, but I still have, I'm kneeling up here, I still have a lot of head height and a lot of space available. So if I was to position this correctly with its back to the wind or side to the wind, then I could essentially be able to ward off any of those cold winds, assuming it doesn't change direction, of course. Enough space for me to lay down in my sleeping bag and roll mat and sleep. Enough space for me to get my head fed underneath the shelter if need be, and plenty of space for my gear. And of course, because it's got an open front to it, I could also have a fire relatively close to this, being mindful of course of the cordage that's dangling down here and also this triangle of material here as well. But all in all, it is what it is. Let me get closer to the camera. All in all, it is what it is. It's a slightly different shelter configuration. In all honesty, and I'm very conscious of confirmation bias here, I prefer the A-frame type shelter. It's quicker to set up, there's much more space underneath it, not a scrap of material is actually wasted, whereas with this, in my opinion, there is some of the material that isn't providing a great deal of coverage, but of course it is providing coverage from the wind and those cold winds blowing in. So there we have it, the Adirondack type shelter. First go at putting it up took me much longer than the A-frame shelter, but then again, if it's the first time you've put this type of shelter up and you're playing around and experimenting with the tension and the height of the guy line and height of the ridge line and things like that, then I suppose it's to be expected. But this will be my shelter for the day while I cook myself up that little fry up and get on with my other tasks. Personally, I'm probably going to go back to the A-frame type shelter, but it was worth a punt, right? Here I am back at the Gypsy well. It doesn't seem to be filling up anymore, seems to have reached its peak. So what I'm going to do now is I've brought my metal mug with me. Make sure that's in shot. Yeah, there we go. Brought my metal mug with me. I'm going to very carefully scoop this water out, get as close to the bottom of this hole as I can, and then allow it to fill up again. And the reason that I'm doing that is because all the video and reading that I've looked at tell me to do that. But of course, as I've been digging this well, there's been a lot of agitation. I've been disturbing the earth around it. There's going to be a lot of dirt in here that needs to sink to the bottom. So let's start scooping this out. In actual fact, clearly it's not something you're going to get out of your tap. I appreciate that. But that isn't too bad. If I look at that now, yes, there are pieces of debris floating around in it. But if I look beyond that at the actual water, it is much clearer than the water that I was collecting from the large piece of standing water that's behind this camera right now. As I'm scooping this up, I'm being very, very careful to not knock anything into it from my footwear. I'm also being very careful not to knock the sides of the well with the mug itself and just further agitate the earth, the clay, whatever the soil type is around here. Still not reached the bottom of this, so as you can probably tell, I've ladled out a good half dozen, maybe more, mugs of water here, so a fairly decent amount is collected. And what I'm starting to notice here, it will be very difficult for you to pick up on camera, but what I'm starting to notice is roughly this area here, where my finger's pointing, hoping you can pick that up, I can see water starting to stream in. Just here, it's starting to stream in, starting to pool in. I think I'm doing more harm than good now at this point with what I'm collecting, just agitating the bottom. So I'm going to walk away again, let this fill up, let it settle, come back and repeat the process. That's filling up incredibly quickly. I mean, crazily so, to be perfectly honest. It's interesting, I can see clear water coming in, or clearer water, but as soon as it hits this actual well, I can see it start to cloud. Again, I appreciate it's very difficult for you to be able to see that on camera, but from what I'm seeing, it's coming in clear, or clearer, but starting to cloud when it gets in here. Quite amazing to see that fill up so quickly. I'm hoping you can kind of see this on camera, just how quickly this is happening. I imagine it would only be a minute or two before it's actually reached the level that it was when I walked across here, which shows just how quickly it fills up. That doesn't appear to be rising anymore, so I'm glad I hung around. and once again filling up very, very quickly. And once again, the water that's seeping in that I can see appears to be coming in very, very clear. It's almost like a running tap, but clearly not as clean. So I'm going to let that fill up again. I'm going to go back to the camp area, process some firewood, let that fill up again, come back and then probably collect the water from what's seeped in on this occasion and run that through the brown bag. Okay, if you just have a look at that, it's not the dirtiest water you've ever seen, and it's certainly not the dirtiest water I've ever put into this brown bag, so fingers crossed we should see a result from this. Okay, so that brown bag is now overflowing. I'm going to get this carried back to my camp area ASAP, wait for it to run down to that runoff line, the stitch line, and then start collecting. So whilst I don't expect you to be able to see in there, I can see that that water has now filtered down to the stitch line that I can see, which indicates that any water that I can collect from this point on will be safely filtered and I can then boil it. Here we are, folks, the end of another all-dayer and almost at the end of November. I'm going to be very cliched here and say I don't know where the year's gone. I don't know where the year's gone. I genuinely don't. What I do know though is that I'm about to sink my cholesterol-loving face into this beauty of a fry up there. Let's have a look at how the day went then. So what did we want to cover off? New style of shelter that I've put together here. It was interesting, it was good fun. I can definitely see a use case for it. To me, there's just a lot more faffing about than the A-frame type shelter. It's not as quick to deploy. There's more things to do. I don't think, well, you don't get as much space underneath it. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. However, If I need to keep the wind off me, I can't think of a better type shelter than this, or just using a traditional complete lean-to type shelter would work, of course. So that was good fun putting that together. The Gypsy well, I've been thinking about the Gypsy well, excuse me if you will, just while I have a mouthful of charcoal. The Gypsy well. That clearly wasn't 50 centimetres wide by deep by long, was it? I skimped on the dimensions there. What I am really pleased about though is how quickly it's filtering through the millbank bag. Now that mug is almost full, it's filtering through at the moment. Beautifully clear water, as it always is at the end of coming through a millbank bag, so that's good. Been thinking about it though, I think the fact that I skimped on the depth of it is more problematic than skimping on the left and right and back to front dimensions, and here's why I'm thinking why. When I leave that Gypsy well to settle, the sediment settles to the bottom. Yeah, there's still some in the water suspended, of course there is, but the sediment sinks to the bottom. When I took out the first mug or two, it was beautifully, well, it was much clearer than that at the bottom, because of course when you scoop it from the top, you're taking in less sediment and agitating the sediment less, but the lower down you get that Gypsy well, the more you're agitating it. The dirtier the water is going to be, the more debris I'm putting through that millbank bag, so the slower it's going to filter. So I can absolutely see the value in having a deep well. Having it particularly wide and long though, I'm not sure what the value of that is, other than to give you the working space to dig deeper. It may just be a byproduct of that. So next time I dig one, I'm not going to skimp on the depth of it. I'm going to dig it to the 50 centimetres that's recommended, maybe even a little more, because I think that allows you, this gravity can do some of the work filtering for you as well. But I enjoyed digging it. I enjoyed showing, the concept of it working. That worked well. And then of course the fry up. Well, it's a fry up in the woods. There's not a lot can go wrong with it. The egg managed to make its way out here, so if nothing else had gone to plan today, the egg made its way all the way out into the woods without cracking. Another good day, different type of shelter, Gypsy well, fry up in the woods. Who can complain? On the way back, I'm going to try very hard to find some silver birch for me to be able to harvest. I may need to go to a different part of the woods where I know there's been quite a lot of it felled recently, so I'll go there on the way back, and if I do find any, I'll share with you the outputs of that in a future video when I carve a spoon from it. Thank you as always for watching the video. Throughout this there's been a little button in this corner of the screen down here. If you find value in my videos, if you'd like to see more, if they make you think, if they make you laugh either at me or with me, I'm happy with both. But if they add value to what you want to get out of the outdoors, please do consider clicking on that subscribe button. Thank you as always for watching. If you've got any comments today, any observations about the shelter, the Gypsy well, maybe you've dug one and you've encountered similar challenges, maybe you've dug it deeper and overcome some of those challenges, as always, do let me know in the comments below. For those of you that are regular commenters, you'll know that I almost always come back to you and say thank you or ask for more or engage in conversation. So if you're one of those people that hasn't commented and thinks it'll just disappear into the ether, that's probably not the case. So do feel free to comment below and let's strike up a conversation about it. Thanks as always to those of you that are subscribers. Thanks to those of you that aren't but still took the time out of your day to watch. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.